Of course, thank you very much for remembering to record Muhimu Sana. So we have Dr. Vincent Ogutu, who's the Vice Chancellor, Strathmore. We also have on the panel, on the far end, we have Martin Mbaya, who serves as the Director of Executive Education at Strathmore Institute of Public Policy and Governance. On my immediate right, we have Ken Gichinga, the Chief Economist at Mentoria Economics. And lastly, joining us from Shanghai, China, we have Professor Monica Karens Macau, who is the Academic Director for MLM Oman Program, Academic Director for Africa. So that's our panel. I don't want us to waste a lot of time, so we'll go straight to the discussion. And I'm starting with you, Dr. BRICS, first of all. I mean, looking at the term, all the way close, early 2000s, that's when the term came up. And it wasn't as we know it as it stands right now. Because now we see it as a formation of countries with a particular motive. But initially it was just an economic term. How did this economic term morph into this idea of BRICS that we have right now, just to set the foundations?
I'm glad you asked that, Noah, because as people know, BRICS is spelled B-R-I-C-S. You know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And we've always argued in Kenya that the K is missing. We need to put the K there for it to become BRICS. And then we'll be talking real estate, as you were saying earlier. So at first, it just came about as a coalition of countries that were trying to provide a new solution to the world economy where everything is based on the dollar. And then later on, it started going beyond just economics to also geopolitics. How can they shift the axis of power from the old, say, US, European dominance? And that's a lot of what we're seeing now. And for me, the history has always fascinated me. I used to be an economist. I consider myself a recovering economist, having moved more into organizational psychology. And I think my role today will be more of the Mwananchi now. Yes. Someone who understands some economics and is wondering how powerful is this BRICS thing? Is it really going to change the world order? Will we have a new currency? Will we have new world powers and new dominance? And how will that affect us as a country, especially as Kenya? So I'm here to ask questions, reflect a bit on the history, and then hear what our experts here and in Shanghai have to tell us.
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. So I hereby knight you, the co-moderator.
Graciously accepted.
Very, very important. I'm glad we don't have a K yet there. Ken, I know you've been looking forward to that. And your name starts with a K. Anyway, let me not, you know, when I was young, I wanted to be a poet, but here we are today. So, Ken, we've talked, Dr. has touched a little bit on how the term morphed, yeah? And just the recent summit, it was quite interesting to think about it. Now it's expanding. Now it's not just, it started from BRIC, it went to BRICS from 2001 to 2009. Then we had South Africa come in 2010, thereabout. And in the year 2023, we are talking about BRICS Plus. So this thing is morphing into something else, and people are taking keen interest. In a very simple language, why? Why so much interest on this BRICS situation?
Many thanks, Noah, and good morning, participants. Indeed, BRICS has been morphing, but I think it's good to reflect on its origins. This was back in 2001. Interestingly, BRICS has an American origin, almost ironically. This was back in 2001 when Goldman Sachs issued a paper to look at what would be the biggest 50 economies over the next 50 years. And that was a question that Jim O'Neill, the chief economist at Goldman Sachs, was trying to answer And somebody might ask, why were they trying to ask that question at that particular time? And that's pretty much because interest rates at that time were next to zero. That's the time that Alan Greenspan was the Fed chair, and really he had promised that nobody would make any money from American bonds. So interest rates were next to zero. So investors needed to know what are the opportunities that American investors can get abroad. And in that paper, the Brazil, Russia, India, China came up. If you look at all those four, the one thing they have in common is countries of high growth rates, huge populations, and will be excellent markets for American products. It's ironical that today we consider BRICS as an anti-American thing. It's actually coined in Wall Street. I think that's a very important thing. But it wasn't always the case. In fact, it took up to 2006 before the first foreign ministers in the UN summit decided to meet on the sidelines to explore this idea of there's something in these BRICS coming up. And when it got to 2008, remember we had a massive global financial crisis, 2008, and people are starting to ask, this global financial crisis has been disastrous. Is there a way we could rethink this global architecture? And that's the time now we were approaching now South Africa being admitted in 2010. And for the longest time, it's really been an annual summit. It was only till 2014 when the issue of a bank was actually conceived and put to paper. The new development bank, that was in Fortaleza in Brazil. So I'd say that has been the biggest achievement to date. And of course, what we saw 2 weeks ago was a significant achievement where we had 6 new members who were added. I'm not saying it's BRICS plus 6. Possibly it's good to take a different name. So I think the philosophy now is thinking, it's really thinking about what is an alternative financial architecture and how can that be useful, particularly to the global south, in which Kenya and many other countries are part of. The main thesis that they said in that last summit was it's about equality and inclusivity, which was a bit ironical because about 40 members applied, but only 6 were admitted.
Yes.
So that whole thesis of inclusivity still needs to be tested a bit further, but it's an emerging thing. I think it's still morphing, as you've said. Plenty of things still being tested, nothing concrete. But the West is watching because this is almost supposed to be a check to the G7, really, if you think about it. So I think there's much to discuss and much to unpack on how that will affect both Kenya and the rest of the African continent.
All right. The issue about policy, and first of all, that feeling of being disenfranchised, because we can unite in our, if we have a common quote unquote enemy, we can decide and say, let us come together because we feel that guy is being unfair. How can we work together as much as we might not see eye to eye ourselves? And that has been sort of the undertone sometimes when you talk about this BRICS situation. Because there are quite divergent views who are coming on board when we talk about BRICS. Yeah, having Iran now coming on board. At the same time, you have Saudi Arabia on the same situation. But maybe from the foundational talk of it, I want to bring in Professor Monica Macau. That issue of feeling disenfranchised and the alternative that BRICS want to offer. Explain to us what are these imbalances that have been there, globally speaking, and what are we trying to sort of level when you talk about the balance between global economies and the world at large? Professor Monica, are you able to get us? If there's a technical challenge, I think, yes.
If I can chime in a little bit on that. Just starting off from where Ken spoke, which is we have a dollar standard right now where a lot of trade in the world. Over 50% of the trade that's going on in the world is denominated in dollars. And some people feel that's a huge advantage for one country and a big disadvantage for the others. So that's one of the reasons why some people might feel disenfranchised from this and think that we might need something else. And then on the political side, like you said, it's interesting that people with such diverse interests are coming together. So again, it might be that phenomenon of thinking they have a common enemy that's uniting them, because really, when you look at India versus China, I mean, they're on opposite sides of the divide, and yet they're coming together here. So the way I look at it, if I just go geographically at the new entrants who are now being brought in. So on the Middle East side, you see Saudi Arabia, Iran. Obviously, oil, petrol is a big deal in the world economy. And so having a member who has such a big impact on the world economy would give some power to this group. Then you look at countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, who are being invited in, and also Argentina. What's the possible significance of that? Controlling the world seas. So you have the Suez Canal, you bring in Egypt and Ethiopia, then you're controlling a lot of the flows, both in terms of economics, but also from a security point of view. So there's also some power play there. You move to Argentina, you have the Magallanes Strait. So in the north, you have the Panama Straits, then south, you have the Magallanes Strait, which give them access between the Pacific and the Atlantic. So again, you're controlling the world's major seas by bringing in some of these guys. So there's definitely some power play going on over here. It's partly about the currency, but it's also partly about control, political control, geopolitical control.
That's good to know, because, I mean, as Ken noted, and I mean, it's public knowledge, 40 countries expressed interest. I think 2023 made an application to join BRICS, and only those few were chosen. So it was very strategic from what I'm getting from you. You don't just onboard anyone. I don't know whether we've gotten Prof. She's not yet there. All right, thank you very much. Other than that, Martin, other than that aspect that Prof has mentioned, Dr. has mentioned, I'm looking at, because we were having breakfast there, and one of the issues, sorry for those of us who are fasting, and by the way, I'll give you an opportunity to, if you have any questions, you can always type. We have a Q&A segment. We'll be answering your questions later on as part of this forum. But when we're having breakfast there, one of the issues, even what sort of motivated this conversation, it was that something is happening globally, and it seems not many people care. Then we look back in 100 years and be like, oh, that was happening. Well, how about we start caring about that? And I'm wondering, Martin, because I'm looking at we as a country, me as an individual, asking myself, why should I care about this BRIC formation? Does it contribute a piece to my building? You know, in that BRIC connoisseuring. But talk to me, why are people so interested, and why should they care? Especially, I know your passion is in the MSMEs, businesses, and also normal 180. Why should they care about this BRIC situation?
Yeah, Noah, thank you for that question. My entire set of comments during today's conversation will be anchored on 3 pillars: systems, markets, and institutions. I repeat that again: systems, markets, and institutions. And if I am an SME, if I'm a small medium enterprise, micro also, and there's a BRICS summit, the first question I would have is, when the summit happens in my country, can I get a tender to offer some kind of service at this particular gathering? And interestingly, for many of the small businesses in South Africa, that was one of the questions. When the event happens in Sandton, what does that mean for SMEs? So at a base level, I think BRICS and the annual meetings will offer that kind of opportunity. Being more strategic and being more systemic, BRICS offers an opportunity for SMEs to access markets that they have traditionally been excluded from. BRICS offers easy access to those markets through a mechanism of currency, and I hope the economists on the panel will help unpack that. And if I contextualize myself to Kenya, I'm an SME in Nairobi, and I want to do business in China, or in Brazil, or in India. How do I engage? How do I have all barriers that prevent me from doing business get reduced? Traditionally, a lot of commerce has happened between Kenya and Western markets, in particular, I'll pick the US, and a lot of negotiations happening now in the context of Kenya are westward looking. Yet, a lot of the business among small players is actually looking east. So if you think of the southern part of China, a lot of the SMEs import material from China, but it's very difficult for them to work with the current system structures that are dollar anchored. How can BRICS help simplify that perspective? And again, I look to the economists to demystify that. And then the final thought around BRICS is this question of the digital economy. In our introductory remarks, we didn't touch much on what's happening in innovation with respect to digitization. Issues of artificial intelligence. The two key powers in the area of AI are China and the US. And the US has dominated this space in terms of the technology, so has China. One could argue one is private sector led, one is state led. A lot of issues related to data are playing out in Africa in the context of those technologies. So again, for SMEs that use M-Pesa, that use Chinese technology, maybe Huawei, that use Google, that use Amazon, TikTok, when you hear a lot of these brands, it's an east-west access. BRICS offers an opportunity to reduce some of those barriers when a lot of the larger policymakers, and I hope Professor Keret can unpack this, have those big discussions. But at the end of the day, because you're expecting business to implement, then BRICS offers a platform for innovation and new institutions like the new development, like the development bank, that can not only make currencies more flexible, but establish an entirely new digital economy that allows these SMEs to get access to the market. And I'll unpack that a little bit more based on those three pillars.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you for setting that foundation there. Now, for starters, for a long time, BRICS has been synonymous, and I hope the technical issue with Prof in Shanghai is sorted later on. But that notwithstanding, we start with this issue of currency because initially it was thought to be very important that BRICS is synonymous with doing away with the dollar. Now, just looking on how the dollar has impacted me and you in a Kenyan household during COVID and also post-COVID, because I've seen the government go into G2G fuel limitation deals to sort of preserve dollar, that shortage. They raise interest rates in the United States, we are suffering on this end. And that seems like a solid argument, Daktari, to be like, okay, is there a way that we can avoid this, that we are at the whims of one currency? Maybe talk to me about that history, where we're coming from with this issue of the dollar and maybe what BRICS is trying to introduce, bring to the table.
No, very, very good question, Noah, because obviously if you want to buy something from another country, you want to import something, or you've got somebody studying abroad and you have to pay their fees, you're forced to get dollars so that you then go and import whatever it is and pay for whatever it is. And sometimes you wish you could just give your Kenya shillings to that university and you're done. But instead you're losing money because whatever fees you were told you would be paying changes as time goes. So they still tell you, look, it's just $1,000, $10,000, or let's say $3,000, which used to be, 300,000 shillings. And then now it's 450,000 shillings, as far as you're concerned. As far as they're concerned, no, we're still charging you $3,000. That hasn't changed. But for me, it's become 450, thousand shillings instead of, the 300,000. So you wish that you could just pay in Kenya shillings. And a lot of countries now are beginning to negotiate bilateral agreements. For instance, India and Kenya are now agreeing to accept each other's currencies. You pay me in rupees, I'll pay you in Kenya shillings, and it's fine, because at some stage we know that India is going to buy from Kenya, Kenya is going to buy from India, so why go through another currency? So I'll take you back. You've asked about the history. Of course, the earliest history of currencies is somebody has something precious, and he's afraid it might get stolen. So I give it to somebody who's got a secure location, like maybe a jeweler's. Since they sell jewels, they have safes, they have, iron bars, and they have good security. So you tell the fellow, can you keep my diamonds or my gold ring or whatever for me and give me a receipt? And they give you a receipt. And then later on you tell someone, why don't you just take over my diamonds that are such and such a store, and I give you the receipt and it's now yours, and now you have a currency. And so when the whole idea of international currencies came up, they wanted a kind of currency that is backed by something. So just like that receipt you have shows that you have some jewels or rings or whatever at the jewelers, now you'd have entire countries saying this dollar is backed by 35, like an ounce of gold for every $35. And so if ever you wanted the gold back, you just give the dollars back to the US Federal Reserve and they'll give you your gold. And now you're fine. And that was the understanding at the beginning. But then after a while, of course, market economics comes into play, and you find that maybe the dollar is overvalued and needs to be devalued. And then these kinds of issues started coming into play and complicating things. In our case, the Kenya shilling is depreciating against the dollar. So in my earlier example, we're losing. So people want a system that doesn't have to go through another currency, that doesn't have to depend on who has the greatest deposits of gold. They want, in a sense, something close to barter trade, where you know what I have, I know what you have, we know what the exchange rate of these items are. Why should that shift because of some other currency that we both have to use? So that's the problem here. And maybe with digital currencies, things might change. I know Martin here knows a lot about digital currency, and so does Ken. So I think that's the situation we're in. So we came from a dollar standard, which collapsed in the 70s when we saw it was unsustainable. And now different countries started holding each other's currencies as some kind of a reserve. And you had a freely floating exchange rate mechanism, but still dependent on the dollar.
Okay. And now here we are, BRICS Summit. Actually, one of the issues that people are looking forward to was, okay, let's deal with this issue of the currency. Are we able to get a common currency for BRICS and we do away with dollar, as people call it, de-dollarization? How can we lessen the impact of the dollar? From where we're coming from this history, Ken, how viable is it? Is it something that is achievable? That is one. And two, what will that take? Would it mean we have a common currency or approach a less aggressive way of saying, instead of having dollars as a means of trade, we can purchase with our own currencies? For example, if I go to Uganda, I can pay Ugandans with their Uganda shilling. and they can pay me with the Kenyan shilling other than me paying them in dollars and vice versa. So what approach? Because I realized during the summit there was a softening on this issue of de-dollarization. They're like, no, in terms of currency, we are trying to approach this carefully. Bring us on board on how this is being done.
No, many thanks, Ma. That's a very interesting question. And I think Dr. Ogutu has given a very good history on currency. And historically, currency, we've thought of it as a commodity, really backed by gold, backed by silver. And for a long time, that dominated monetary thinking, that currency has to be backed by a substance. And the problem is there wasn't enough gold in the mines to keep up with global demand. So in the 70s, we moved to what is called fiat currencies. This is money that is backed by law. And I think that was one of the most greatest developments in monetary thinking, because it removed us from this idea that money has to be backed by a physical object to the idea that money is actually backed by law. And it was not a new concept. Actually, if you look at the writings of Aristotle in ethics, he talks about nomisma, and he says nomisma is a creature of the law. It's not a substance that's found in nature, but a creature of the law. So what happened in the 70s was not really a new thing, but it was actually exposing the wisdom of the ancients, that money is actually factored in you and I agreeing that the legal tender of Kenya is this currency. And that was the breathtaking part of it. So when you have that understanding that currency, the value of currency is backed by law, you have to ask yourself, which of these countries provides the greatest constitutional jurisprudence? And the United States has dominated that since 1945. So my biggest challenge with the BRICS is, number one, they're contesting, there is a very interesting point, that global trade is dominated by the dollar. But they're not providing a solution in their current situation as BRICS. Do these countries in their law, in their jurisprudence, do they provide that confidence? Talk about South Africa and Brazil. These are the two most unequal societies, economically speaking. China also has had issues. So if you understand that the value of a currency, the reason I accept US dollars is in the confidence I have in the government behind it, then the BRICS actually start rolling back and saying, well, okay, maybe we do need a broad set of currencies. So I think it's an important point, and it's an important challenge to the BRICS that, yes, they are raising an important point, but they're not giving the world that confidence that they can be the vision of justice and liberty and equality, whether it's China, with all its domestic issues, Russia. So I think that's the biggest challenge. So now they're thinking around that, and for me, I'm surprised that they even mentioned going back to the gold standard, because to me it tells me that they don't understand the limitations of the gold standard. Almost, we're talking of 50 years ago. So I think for me, the benefit of BRICS is in challenging, really, should the dollar be dominate, but without providing a solution of we are the next beacons of light. We are the next beacons of justice and liberty and equality. You know, you cannot give what you don't have. And for me, that is the biggest challenge that BRICS will have to face. They ask an important question, but they don't seem to provide that answer, particularly if you look at the domestic setup of their particular economies.
Yeah. But BRICS has a precedence of taking time, you know. I mean, in the 14 years post 2009, the only notable thing we've seen is the bank itself, to be honest, other than now 2023 onboarding new members who are also critical players. I don't know whether this is something that BRICS will be musing over and observing, but you say, you know, you're all about systems, you're all about markets, Martin. And now I'm thinking, like just a normal Kenyan. I mean, I'm trying to import a car. I'm in the importation business. All of a sudden, I'm told I can't afford this thing. Why? Because something has happened with the dollar somewhere. Yeah, I mean, there seems not to be a particular sort of, I feel it's sort of bipolar, because it offers stability, as you say, because we know there is that consistency, but also at the same time, it's like, oh, things are changing and my pocket is impacted. Talk to me about that. And is BRICS offering a solution, or as Ken puts it, is they're pointing out a problem and they're saying, we'll see what to do about it in the near future?
Yeah. So from a systemic perspective, let me frame all the contributions that have been made into 5 systems. One is the economic system, issues of trade. Second is the financial system, issues of money. Third is the innovation system, issues of knowledge. Fourth is the social system, issues of relationship. And then 5th is the governance system, issues of power. So you can think of each of those 5 different systems, and BRICS, I would argue, is focusing on arguably 2, the economic and issues of governance, power. From a multilateral perspective, can we offer a second actor that gets us away from a unipolar world dominated by the US to a second set of actors who can oppose? From an economic perspective, can we open up our markets and make them common because we have a massive population? Because one of our economies has been accelerating and growing so fast, it offers a challenge to the dominant US. Viewed from that perspective of systems, I want to import a car, primarily cars in Kenya being imported from Japan. Yen is one of the reserve currencies. China has a big production of vehicles, a big manufacturing industry for vehicles. Yuan is not one of the major reserve currencies. If I wanted to buy a car from Asia, I can get a much cheaper car from China. And ideally, I would want to have a direct exchange between my Kenyan shillings and the yuan. But the way the global financial system is set up, the pecking order of the yuan is much lower down. So BRICS offers a platform that allows China and countries similar to China that can be trading directly with their African counterparts, a system that gives access to SMEs, small medium enterprises, informal actors or weaker economies to access each other's markets and not work through a structured system. I wanted to make a second point. BRICS is not happening in a vacuum. So BRICS is happening in the context of the UN, and so the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, arguably are creatures of the UN and the League of Nations from the 40s. Fast forward to the 70s, as Dr. Ogutu was alluding, issues of oil, and we moved away from the dollar. BRICS is also happening in the context of the African Union, OAU in 1963, and then issues of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And BRICS is also happening in the context of the digital economy, which offers cryptocurrency, and from the context of fiat currency and governments, central bank digital currency. Therefore, if I'm importing a car from Asia, in the current context, Japan, but assuming all things were fair and equal, maybe China, suddenly I'm spoiled for choice. I can go with cryptocurrency, although in most places it's treated as illegal. I can go with central bank digital currency, which is well thought through, but has not yet been implemented. I'm compelled to go with the dollar, the pound sterling, the euro, or the yen as the strongest reserve currencies. And I have an option to go with some of these other alternate currencies that may emerge. For example, a BRICS currency, whatever, maybe we'll call it the BRIC. Therefore, in answer to your question, should BRICS be doing something about currencies to simplify those imports, exports? Absolutely. Is BRICS likely to do it in favor of African countries? Maybe. So there's South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia, I think among those 3 fairly large economies in the context of Africa, we might see some innovation. But I would argue in an African context, maybe there's no need of waiting for BRICS. Could the African Continental Free Trade Area and some of the protocols and other instruments emerging out of that compel Africa to innovate in parallel with BRICS.
Okay.
And I think those are some of the debates you noticed that Kenya was struggling with in whether to engage in the BRICS summit in a substantive way, while it's already trying to negotiate some efforts with the US, with the EU, in the context of the East African community, and also with the AU in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Back to you, Lord.
Okay.
If I could jump in on one of the reasons why BRICS is so worried about the current regime. You read how last year the US impounded Russian assets and froze the holdings that the Russians have in US bonds, and so of course all these countries are frightened if all of a sudden what I'm using to back my currency, because I bought maybe dollar deposit denominated bills and bonds, and then suddenly they are frozen, then suddenly I can't have access to them. They don't want that sort of situation. So they're looking at a situation where no single country has that kind of power. So that's on one side. And if you look at Saudi Arabia, so we talked about the 70s when the gold standard, I mean, when the dollar standard kind of collapsed. And so Nixon promised to Saudi Arabia, will protect you if you sell all your oil in dollars. So always demand that it be paid for in dollars. But then now you see Saudi Arabia coming up and saying, I think we can be protected by China and Russia. So now they're confident enough to back away from that deal and then denominate it in whatever, accept payments in whatever they're going to accept it. So there's all this feeling of wanting to be independent and not subject to the power of a certain country because of the monetary system that we've put in place.
The petrodollar,
right?
That was quite a move by Nixon, yeah.
Yeah. And it held until just now.
I know. That was a genius move, come to think of it. I don't know, under the BRICS format, because now we are talking, there are different power dynamics, even amongst the BRIC itself. We're discussing the issue of currency. I mean, if we're looking at an alternative currency to dominate this formation, with the Chinese yuan, yeah, or the ruble. We saw it withstood some heavy hits during this situation that they've had with Ukraine. And I think that's quite an interesting perspective, come to think of it. But Ken, now I'm looking at this BRICS situation now. Kenya, where we sit, because Kenya, we've morphed into something interesting. I can't call us fence sitters. We are more strategic with our approach. Traditionally, you look at this country, we've really been leaning west, yeah. And I don't want it to be a black or a white situation, or west versus the global south situation, west for the rest. But we seem to have, we are balancing interest. Now somebody's asking, okay, BRICS is coming up. Is there a way I can belong on both aisles? I can stay with the US systems, the current system that is the global order that we have right now, and also be curious enough and be allowed at least to be curious enough and look at this BRICS situation and even put in an application. Ken.
Indeed, it was Kwame Nkrumah who said, we neither face east nor west, we face forward. And indeed, there is great utility in looking at the globe and understanding what works best for Kenya. And I really like what Dr. Ogutu has said about the Russian experience, their bonds being confiscated, a lot of their assets being confiscated. But possibly even more profound is the issue of Russia being kicked out of SWIFT, the SWIFT system. That's one of the most important payment settlement systems in the world. So I think for a lot of countries that didn't even support the Russian war, the idea that you can be removed from a payment system if you disagree with the West, I think even the neutrals found that a bit disturbing. Hence the question, can we have multiple payment systems? You know, the issue of BRICS actually is also part of Western failure in a way that when those finance ministers were meeting on the UN summit, the issue then was about IMF voting powers. And BRICS at that time controlled about 26% of GDP, but only had about 15% voting power in the IMF. America had 16. So you have one country that has a bigger voting power than 4 or 5 mega countries. And those are the issues that wanted to have been discussed, but that platform wasn't being provided. So this issue would not have gone this far had those issues been settled around voting powers, IMF voting powers. How do we get this? So it brings us to a situation where we become dependent on the system. You know, you look at poor Uganda next door, they're being told, accept this or you're out of the system. So I think a lot of people are worried, and that's why the question of, can we have alternative arrangements? And I think Kenya should also be part of that conversation. And that is, yes, we do need multiple, we are moving towards a multipolar world. In as much as America has done a great job of globalizing the world, it's not safe for anybody, including America, for that power to sit in one person's seat. It needs to be spread across the world. Just the way we see here in Kenya. I mean, I love using M-Pesa. But I always say, if M-Pesa one day went down, what are you going to do as Kenyans? You know, we have enough payment platforms. Are we going to have a crisis? So I think even from a risk management perspective, it's healthy if the world has multiple payment systems. So even if you don't agree with the West, you can still continue with your global trade. So I think that was a real eye-opener for a lot of countries in terms of what it means when a whole financial architecture is dominated by one country.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned M-Pesa. I think that's one of the, as a Kenyan, anywhere you go, you just say, let me tell you guys about M-Pesa. Everyone listen, that was life-changing, trust you me, even in our discussions. Martin, I'm looking and also trying to talk about innovation. You've talked about the tech giant, and I'm seeing questions are coming in. If you have questions, please, we're coming to a Q&A shortly. I see already some questions are streaming in about neocolonialism, you know, so prepare yourself for those tough ones. Yeah, whether we are moving from one system to the other, and whether it will work for Africa as a continent. But the issue of tech, because tech is supposed to be the equalizer. And even why people are really passionate about this issue of crypto, in a way, was it doesn't sort of, it put us on the same platform, yeah? Unlike the systems that we've been running, in a way, somebody holds an advantage of it. And I'm seeing governments are trying to catch up. You talked about the central bank, you know, digital currencies. We saw, I think, a rollout, was it in Ghana? They've been quite brilliant about that. Ours, there was a production of a paper on CBDC. Yes, I don't know where we are in that regard. But Africa, we seem to be very, we absorb some of these ideas very fast, but somehow come to a halt. I don't know whether coming to a formation as this one, as a BRIC formation, could inspire that even further innovation, not only to serve that formation of BRICS, but also to serve intra-Africa trade, which is a huge concern. We're not trading as high as we should be amongst ourselves.
Yes. Excellent question, Noah. One of the key announcements out of BRICS was the formation of an AI study group. This was by His Excellency President Xi Jinping of China. And interestingly, they were looking at the issues around the ethics of AI, responsible AI, Some of my own work, some of our own work here at Strathmore looks at that area of artificial intelligence from multiple perspectives. And at the business school, we focus on issues of responsible AI, some of those ethical issues being raised around power. Secondly, there is a question of the sustainable development goals. Maybe obviously can touch on it, but this year our theme is on sustainability. And so many of the issues being raised around human rights, the social system, issues around relationships. At a global level, how do you come up with frameworks that allow for innovation while at the same time ensuring we carry everybody along? So specifically on that issue of innovation, BRICS offers an interesting opportunity. And I think for a country like Kenya, it's possible to have our cake and to eat it. Have our cake in the context of being one of the largest economies on the African continent. One of the big risk takers who is constantly innovating, items like M-Pesa. So I was quite keen to see in the context of the central bank, Governor Thuge is exploring issues of the Pan-African payments and settlement system, which can weigh in, but it offers an alternative maybe to SWIFT, and it offers an alternative to what BRICS might be thinking. Because of we call it variable, I think it's variable geometry, I forget the exact phrase, but the fact that if all of East Africa is not ready to move in one direction, as we saw in negotiations with the European Union, two countries can decide to proceed and negotiate with a larger collection of countries, and other countries within the regional economic community will follow. We've seen Kenya innovate quite a bit in that space. Kenya has been one of the pioneers on issues of the sustainable development goals, business and human rights in the context of we have a national action plan that domesticates UN global principles. So on innovation, I think Kenya could find creative ways of, say, partnering with Ethiopia, Egypt, South Africa in an African context in alignment with BRICS, even if Kenya is not a member of BRICS. Kenya can find creative ways of partnering with China, with Russia, with India, with Brazil. And if you think of various products, Mbaya, the planes from Brazil, China, multiple areas, there's room to innovate without necessarily being a member and signing, with a focus on implementation. And a closing thought just around innovation. We noticed our foreign secretary, our cabinet secretary for foreign affairs represented Kenya at BRICS in South Africa, if I'm not wrong, in Santon. It would have been interesting to see the CS for education, the CS for IT, and in the meetings happening on the ground, focusing squarely on positioning Kenya to be the leader on AI. We have a lot of tech companies in Kenya experimenting, and there's a lot of unanswered questions around data. How do we get our line ministries focused on implementation that can help build a new policy framework around technology and innovation to drive issues in the BRICS conversation, even if Kenya is not a member? Okay. And I think moving forward, that's the opportunity. And then as a private university, we tend to get in my own classes, public policy at the graduate level, not the undergraduate level, entrepreneurship. Those questions arise, they come up a lot. So as long as we are tracking what's happening in BRICS and focusing on implementation, even as the conversations happen, I think Kenya can have its cake and eat it. And I think the same can happen to other countries that latch onto this fight. Usually as the bulls fight, it's the grass that suffers. But in this case, as the bulls fight, they can trample the soil and aerate it and allow the grass to grow better. Can we take advantage of that?
Interesting. I like the new definition of what bulls do.
That's
very bullish.
I mean, no, I was just thinking, traditionally we talk about money, and Ken, of course, appreciates this very much. You have that concept of medium of exchange, something that allows us to go through this medium. I get it, and then I give it to you. You can use it to buy whatever you want. You give me what I'm looking for. So we go through this thing. There's like a medium of exchange. There's that aspect to this whole story. Then there's the whole aspect of store of value, that I can, instead of keeping my wealth in the bananas that I just harvested, I can keep it in something that can actually store it better than the bananas themselves. And 5 years from now, I can still use that. And I think what we're trying to look for is something that, in a sense, caters for both. But probably the most important one is the medium of exchange. You know, a medium that doesn't cost me too much. So the cost factor here, the transaction cost, is a little bit too much with the way things are structured. And we're looking for a quicker way of exchanging, a medium that is easy. And speaking to innovation, I think the direction we're moving with cryptocurrencies might actually solve some of this. And then you'd have multiple options, because there are many types of cryptocurrencies, but the principle is the same, that we can authenticate a transaction. We're actually tracking a transaction. You can't falsify the transaction. And so we can actually follow through on that transaction. So that, I think, to a large extent, takes care of the medium of exchange. The store of value, I don't have an answer to that, and I'll open it up to the others. But they can also critique the whole idea of using blockchain as a way of authenticating transactions and then going the crypto way. And then we don't have to talk about any one currency in the world.
I know. The barrier to that is that it's called government. Yeah, in a way, it has to come in and see how to regulate. And what crypto and the foundation that when crypto is popping now is that all this thing can just run by itself, because since it's a chain and you can see all the pieces, what's the need of regulation per se? In a way, it wanted to go isolate itself, and governments are like, nah, you know, illegal activities, people can pass money through that. So I think that has been quite interesting. But Dr. I want to pick your mind on something slightly different. You remember the structural adjustment programs? When you talk about Bretton Woods institutions, you know, most of the times I'm told I'm not old enough to relate to that.
To SAPs.
Yes. And I mean, looking at the way, because these institutions are lenders of last resort. So we reach out, they help us, then it comes with conditions. And now many of them, in fact, in our public discourse around debt, has been bordering SAPs. Are we going down that same route? Now with this new formation, looking at the new guys who are coming on board, I mean, Argentina, looking at Egypt, heavily indebted. Causing quite a concern. And people say, might going BRICS a way of sort of running towards greener pastures, especially if this other system you feel it's weighing down, you're getting credit at a more expensive rate compared to your Western counterparts.
Yeah, actually that links very well with one of the questions I saw online about, are we just running from one form of neocolonialism to another form? So what is the power balance in the BRICS? And like you're correctly putting it, if we are the ones who are indebted, then we might be the ones who might be dictated to by the ones who are facilitating all the projects that we're trying to come up with. And there's a very real risk of that. And when you think about the SAPs, which you were saying you don't relate to, I was studying economics at the time when the structural adjustment programs were coming into play. And at that time, it looked really cool. You're being asked to be financially responsible, not to live beyond your means. But the problem was you were being told what to spend on and what not to spend on, which with hindsight, many years later, we were saying, wait a minute, just because we were spending a huge percentage of our income as Kenyans on education, and we were told you have to be self-sufficient, you're spending too much on this, so lower the amount you're spending. For us, it was actually an investment. That's what gave us such an edge in Africa right now. So had we completely complied, then we would be nowhere in terms of future investment and growth of capacity for our country. So ideally, you don't want a situation where someone is dictating to you what you can or cannot spend your hard-earned income on. You best know what is strategic for you. So there was a bit of that problem. And then there's a time when we came under sanctions, and it ended up being a blessing in disguise, because for 1 year, Kenya had to survive on its own. And compared to Uganda, which at that time was dependent 70% on foreign aid and 30% on its own earnings, Kenya ended up being less than 10% dependent on foreign aid and 90% self-sufficient. And we figured, I think we like this, we can actually live like this. And so the joke is that actually people came back and said, it's okay, we'll relax the rules, we'll continue giving you financial aid and all. They kind of wanted us back in the fold in that ecosystem, because we were beginning to prove that, you know, we can survive without all of that. So those were interesting times. So what I advocate for really is a situation where we do have enough independence to run our budget in a strategic way, rather than in a way that might be dictated by somebody else, that might not work in our favor. So, and I think a lot of this BRICS movement is trying to assert that independence. But we do have to be careful, as is pointed out here. Are we coming in a position of power, or will we just move from one boss to another boss?
All right. Interesting. You know, that discussion, once we start talking about, is it neocolonialism, especially when you bring in IMF and the way the country has been dealing with that, you get very, very interesting points of views. Looking at this bank, this BRICS bank, yeah, I think it has around $50 billion available, and it has approved loans of nearly 30 billion, yeah, in terms of creating financial systems that are parallel to what we have. And kind of looking at this situation now, will it reach a time where BRICS and people hold more power in that formation? We'll say, now Kenya, I think you guys should be taking half a glass of water every morning, other than the 2 glasses you're used to. In that regard, are we moving, pointing that question, and we'll be going through other questions, are we moving from one system to another system that we have no control of?
Well, I think we have to be careful to avoid that. The fact that BRICS has been capitalized, actually it's more than $50 billion, I think it's about $100 billion. And that's money that can go to infrastructure, and we do have an infrastructure gap in this country, in this continent. So that can be money that can raise the standard of a country. But again, we don't want to get into another debt trap that we've gotten with other partners. It's an issue of balance. It goes back to, you know, when I think of the Mwai Kibaki period, they really tried to wean off the role of development partners. And at that point, interest rates came quite low, and businesses were getting credit from banks. So think about Kenya today. The T-bill, 1 year T-bill today is about 14%. You know, which bank will lend to any business when our T-bill or treasury bonds at 15–16%? You know, you end up crowding on the private sector. So I think it's important, as you asked earlier on, how should Kenya engage with all these partners? I think every partner brings something useful to the table, but at the end of the day, Kenya has to be in charge of its own destiny. You have to say, we have entrepreneurs, as Martin has said. These entrepreneurs need credit at affordable rates. You can give people credit at 20–25%. So how do we, these development partners, whether it's the World Bank, the IMF, BRICS, how do they help us be able to get enough capital to the hands of entrepreneurs? Because it's the entrepreneurs, at the end of the day, who create wealth in the society. So it comes back to our own fiscal policy as a country.
All right. Martin,
Yes.
going back to the joke, Dr. Ogutu made, and it's kind of interesting, but for that year we were self-sustainable, and all of a sudden people come back and they're like, oh, we're gonna continue lending. You know, that's very suspicious. And now it's many years after, and I'm looking back, I'm like, how didn't I realize that? I know I was a baby. Yeah, but I mean, the term, just, I mean, Mr. Martin, that aspect,
Yeah.
as there in the current world order and the systems that we have, especially in the context of Africa and where we are, is there a level of dependency that is unhealthy? Yeah.
Yeah.
And creating an alternative in the name of BRICS, for example, will it create a healthy environment for African economies, especially in engagements to issues, for example, of debt?
Yeah, and I hope at some point Professor Carrot will be able to weigh in, like, I sense these are some of the areas you'll be able to touch on in detail. Specifically on the issue of debt and the positioning for Africa, I'll go back to my opening framing scenario. I talked about SMEs being invited to a BRICS summit and being given tenders, maybe to supply, it could be gadgets, it could be the clothes, branded clothes, etc. And let me use that to answer your question in a way that makes it practical for policymakers and for the private sector. What BRICS is doing is reconfiguring the global map of movement. So you have the northern corridor, which will take us from St. Petersburg in Russia, cut all the way through Iran, going over a set of mountains, but cut all the way through. And ultimately, if you use the Caspian Sea, you can make it to close to the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean, cutting through a few other countries. And if you had goods emanating from that northern location going south, it's a quick hop to Mombasa, Indian Ocean, and once you're in Kenya, you can move all over Africa. Or you can go through Djibouti and take the Chinese-made train all the way to Addis. Or you can land in Lamu, and I hear we are reviving the Lapset corridor, you can end up in Ethiopia. To set up this kind of infrastructure requires a lot of resources, hence debt. And now Africa is not able to borrow competitively to make some of this infrastructure available. Or if Africa borrows because of the structural adjustment plans, World Bank, IMF, Bretton Woods institutions, either for liquidity issues, IMF, or development, World Bank, Africa is beholden. We'll give you the money, but in exchange for that, you have to do all these different things. So going back to that example of the trader, I think Africa should not even be worried too much about BRICS. I think Africa, the ball is in Africa's court, in that we've got two global powers trying to figure out what to do on the global stage. And two global powers are opening paths to their markets. So if African governments can negotiate for that excluded 70–80% of the economy represented by SMEs, and get agreements maybe that compel some of these actors to give those SMEs access to their markets, if Kenya and South Africa, if Kenya can partner with South Africa to make sure at the next BRICS summit, the door is open for many Kenyan SMEs. It's easy for SMEs to go to South Africa today. You no longer need a visa to go to South Africa. 30 days on your passport, hop to South Africa, do whatever you're doing, and then come back. We have M-Pesa within Kenya. Hopefully we'll have a Pan-African payment system. Going to Ethiopia, you don't need a passport. You just show up, you can spend a ton of time in Addis and come back. If African governments can work on those internal systems, and at times we get along, other times we don't get along, but if we lower those barriers to trust and work the internal, as the external actors, particularly those large players, reconfigure their systems, we will be well positioned for our value chains and supply chains from the moment those windows open to plug into that global economy. And I see China doing that a lot. China is all over, China as a country is all over Africa. Right here in Nairobi, if you go to Kilimani, there's a shopping center there's a news agency, there are all these different things. Kenyan SMEs are being displaced by Chinese SMEs. We've had those complaints every so often. So on the issue of debt, I would flip it and argue, let's not worry too much about structural adjustment plans and all those different things. Let's focus on the 2024 summit in Russia and get the Ministry of Education, Ministry of ICT, Ministry of SME, Hustler Fund, all these different things to position our SME so that the delegation that will go to Russia will be ready to lock deals for these SMEs to take advantage of this reconfigured global landscape. And I don't think it requires much borrowing from the traditional World Bank, IMF to push on the short-term shocks.
Okay.
It calls for innovation and very innovative thinking.
All right.
Back to you.
The spirit of innovative thinking is the beauty of the internet. If somebody is just listening, I see, can we scroll up? We scroll up. We want to take your questions. My intro. Okay, yeah, let's go higher. Thank you very much. Oh, we're still at Matt. Can you hear me? That is that is a long time ago.
Yeah.
But yes. So yes, I didn't do. By the way, my intro I didn't do it so much justice. I should have done a very mega intro and say welcome, to the Alumni Knowledge Series. Yeah, then we have drums all over. But that's for next time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that question by Wahome Gidinji, what does the BRICS alliance mean for the African continental free trade area? Will it enhance or sabotage the agreement? I know we've touched in part of it, but regards to that, will it sabotage or enhance FCTA? Who's gonna pick that?
Yeah, I can run with that. I noticed the AU was invited and attended the BRICS summit. And whereas you initially had South Africa, now you have Ethiopia and Egypt. I believe all are signatories to the African Continental Free Trade Area. I'm yet to confirm, but I believe they've also ratified. I think by moving the axis of power to the global south, and as the AFCFTA continues to take shape because of the various protocols, particularly the protocol on digital trade, I sense BRICS is in favor of AU. It just means, and the Continental Free Trade Area, it just means that African governments should be 10 steps ahead of BRICS and figure out what's in favor for Africa. And then the heads of state designated to be in those conversations can articulate an African position, quite similar to what the Kenya has been trying to do with the US. And in those experimentation, the AU position and the CFTA's interests are being incorporated into how Kenya negotiates with the US on a trade agreement. Although it would be better if all this was being done at the AU level, in Addis or CFTA level, where His Excellency Wamkele Mene in Ghana, but you still have proxies who can work. So I think BRICS, well innovated, well thought through, is good for the CFTA.
Okay.
Well, I think it comes down to the vision that they have about the economy and really about what money does, because all these are avenues in which money circulates. And I really appreciate Dr. Ogutu bringing us back to what is money, what are the properties of money. And I like, it reminds us of the two properties that the issue of the store value and the medium of exchange. However, even when you go further, you realize that sometimes these properties work in opposite directions. That's why gold, which is a very good store value, people would hold it and it would not circulate very easily. And actually, if you think about the Phillips curve, really about inflation and unemployment, it's really about that opposition. So the challenge we have with the dollar system today and the IMFs is they focus on the store value part quite a bit. They keep telling Kenya, it's about your deficits, tightening your deficits. So there's a lot of focus on Kenya's ability to repay its bonds, Kenya's ability to repay its debt. And there's too little conversation about employment. is enough money circulating in your economy? Are you raising the standards of living? So I think if the BRICS can come up with an alternative angle and say, yes, debt is an issue, store value is an issue, but fundamentally, people need to do business. People need a currency. So we do need central banks that, like in the US, have a dual mandate. They look at both inflation and unemployment. I think there's far too little conversation today about unemployment. There's so much about, will Kenya repay its Eurobond next year? Will Kenya repay its debt? Nobody's asking, will the mama boga outside get currency to be able to do her business? So I think if the BRICS can take that alternative idea, and what I said at the very beginning, BRICS countries are countries of high population. So these are countries where unemployment is a huge problem. South Africa, unemployment rate is about 40%. Talk about Brazil, 40%. So if they can say, we want a new system where it's not about debts, but it's about money circulating, putting people into jobs, I think it can have a fantastic result. But if it's just repeating what the other development partners have said, give them money, let them repay our debts, the conversation really does not, it stops being transformational. It stops putting the human being at the heart of the economic system, which is where he should be. And it creates just more development partners who are giving you more orders. So I pray that whether it's BRICS or the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, ask, is there enough currency in these countries? Do people have sufficient currency to do business, to do trade, to lift their standards of living? If the conversation can go that direction, then we can have a whole new wave of prosperity.
Okay. I remember sometimes you get infuriated, Kenya, when the Monetary Policy Committee they release their numbers and Kenya's like, where are the employment numbers? I think it's important. Dr. anything to add in that regard?
I agree with the co-panelists. I think to the extent that BRICS is making us rethink how the payment model is arranged, then probably that's a good thing. It'll accelerate our thinking as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And I still think the answer lies a lot in technology, because we're trading a lot with each other. We're on one continent. Why would we not be able to reach an arrangement in which technologically we can map all these needs and reciprocal arrangements ourselves? Why wouldn't we be able to do that? So to the extent that we're being challenged to come up with innovative ways to trade, I think this is refreshing.
Definitely. All right. So that was from Mohammed Givindi. Thank you for that question. We have Fabian Oworo. BRICS seem to be focused in its initial stage to attract commodity producers, oil, agriculture, and base metals. What does the panel think on the idea that this will affect producers being more interested in joining BRICS and importers still focused on using a stable dollar for imports? So this is the systems we're talking about. Yes.
So the issue of commodity production, and then the issue of imports and the issue of the dollar, I'll take a middle road: stability. So I think it's easier for exports and imports to happen in a world of stability. And I'll give a practical example. I'm currently a PhD student, and I'm collecting my data in Kenya and Rwanda, and I'm studying in South Africa. So when I sit down with my wife and we work on our budget and we project a year out, the precious shillings we have, I need to think of it both in terms of the South African rand and the Rwandese franc. An interesting shock. 2-3 weeks ago, I went to my bank. I'm multi-bank, so I have my money in 2 accounts. I went to one bank and I wanted to pay for some figure in Rwanda. This is about 6,000 shillings, $60, and filled out the paperwork. and left it behind, and the following day I get a call from the bank saying, we have received guidance from the central bank that we cannot complete this transaction unless it's denominated in dollars. And I couldn't understand why. Maybe Ken will help me unpack that. I go to my second bank, and I think both these banks have branches in Kigali, and I was able to do it seamlessly. In 2-3 minutes, I paid in Kenya shillings, and I was able to settle the transaction in Rwandese francs. And I didn't understand what the mismatch was. And then how I budgeted for my own studies 3 years ago to pay rand in South Africa versus today, it's been all over the place. I wish things were simpler. This is in the services sector. I can project this to the commodities sector, oil, gas, agricultural produce, etc. In that sense, the dollar is good because it has allowed a degree of stability. To the extent I had dollars sitting in an account in Kenya, I could plan rationally. But with my Kenya shillings, all over the place. That said, I think there's room for other opportunities if we were in a purely digital economy where the shilling and the franc were not subject to what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in different parts of the world, and issues related to COVID. So dollar is good, but things could be better in a digital economy. I'll leave it to the Economist to unpack what was happening when my banks were treating me in that way, and maybe to speak specifically to commodities.
Definitely, maybe
I'm looking at Ken.
this whole issue kind of dollar shortage, yeah. So everyone is like, we have to amass as many dollars, and even the CPK governor was thinking of floating a dollar-denominated bond, and his argument was to mop up dollars that might be lying in Kenya and people are not using, and sort of utilize that here. But to respond to his queries and also touch on that issue of commodities.
Well, I think it was an interesting decision because for many countries, if you think about Kenya, oil is the largest cost of our imports, about 30% of our import bill, and that's mostly dollars. So if you can have a member in your BRICS that can provide that fuel, whether it's Saudi Arabia, UAE, at a local currency, that can definitely be a point of attraction for members to join BRICS. Because as we were told earlier, even the reason the dollar became so powerful is because of Saudi Arabia's decision to sell oil in dollars. So if one of the enticements, the sweeteners BRICS can say, is our members will be able to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, oil from UAE at their local currencies, I think that can be a huge game changer because it reduces the demand for dollars in the economy, and it can, so I think possibly those are the strategic reasons some of these members were admitted, because they provide things that countries import, countries need dollars to import, and maybe they can provide an arrangement where countries can be buying these goods at their local currency. If that is the thinking behind it, then I think it can really be a game changer.
All right.
I agree with the other panelists. I think there's no way of running away from the dollar, especially in the context of this question. I think the imports that you're probably talking about here are more like consumer goods. Whereas, of course, as Ken points out, we are importers of oil. So all these things you're talking about, commodities, it's only the producers who are interested. No, it's also the grand consumers who are interested. So as a country that imports oil, we are a consumer in that regard. And so we are interested in the conversation. But then if you're interested in buying your iPhone or whatever it is, then you're still going to need to get those dollars. So it's not as if you're looking at totally getting away from the dollar or any other currency. You do need to ultimately have the currency of the country that you're trading with or importing from.
All right. Stability. Yeah, let me see. So that was Fabian War. Thank you very much. And Fabian, you still a second question? The last BRICS meeting did not announce the use of a gold-backed currency. there seem to be disagreements on the composition and governance of this currency. Russia seems to be proposing the use of decentralized digital currency. I'm very passionate right there, Martin. Yeah, not saying you're for Russia or something like that. Yeah, digital currency. I think that the bulk of these digital currencies is still supported by dollar reserves. Is there truly a way for BRICS to de-dollarize, as gold standard seems to be providing regional and political issues? No, we touched on this, but Dr. maybe just for clarification purposes, that question.
If we're going to go the crypto way, where we're actually basing the value of these transactions on the transaction itself, then of course we would be getting away from having reserves, or having dollar reserves, or yuan reserves for that matter. You'd be getting into a different system where you're looking at the value that people are exchanging. What are you giving me, what am I giving you? And we can authenticate that transaction, add it to the blockchain, and then we have something that we've already made an agreement. It's not going to go up and down, and so that could get us away from having to rely on reserves.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I think the issue of the dollarizing is a bit misplaced, in the sense that it's already been happening. It's not a new phenomenon. If you look at global trade 20 years ago, the percentage of global trade in dollars was about 79%. Right now, it's about less than 60%. So the world is already de-dollarizing over the last 20 years. So maybe what somebody might say is, might that accelerate that de-dollarizing? And I think it will come down to, as Dr. Ogutu says, the country, if the reason we need the dollars to buy the iPhone because the US is innovative. So the key question is, how can countries, and I know Martin is a big champion of innovation, how can countries produce more innovative items so that their currency becomes in demand? So at the end of the day, what gives a country the value is the products that country produces. So then come down to, if Kenya wants to, one day have dreams of being a reserve currency, we have to say, are we investing in the best minds, producing the best items in this country, so that everybody will need to have a Kenya shilling to buy our goods and services?
Yes.
Which I think can be a fantastic vision, because it means investing in human capital, making our own iPhones. I think for me, that is the future. But the world is already de-dollarizing. We're moving towards a multipolar world. The question is, will that stop? I don't think it will stop, because innovation is coming up in Singapore, Korea, it's all over the world. And the future consumer will be buying iPhones from the US, cars from Japan, funds from China, tea and coffee from here in Kenya. So we will need that basket of currencies to be able to have those reasonable exchanges.
Yeah, and just to bring it home to the viewers, you know what it feels like to be a reserve currency, a currency that is accepted by everyone. So if you're a Kenyan who's traveled to Uganda, to Tanzania, and you actually haven't bothered to exchange to the local currency, and you show up somewhere and you say, would you accept Kenya shillings? And they say yes. That's what it feels like. Gosh, we recognize this fact, a field that people will actually, I don't even have to bother changing my money. I can always negotiate with the taxi driver, the hotel people. They won't say, no, go get dollars, or go get Tanzania shillings, or Uganda shillings. They say, yeah, we'll take it. And so that's what it feels like. And it comes down to, they know they can use it to buy Kenyan products, or to pay somebody using Kenyan shillings. So that's the power it gives you. I really like the idea of Kenyans innovating, or basically every country innovating, so that they become relevant in this conversation.
Definitely. Yes.
Yeah, maybe if I add to that, in all my webinars and panel discussions, I like throwing in the word Konza. And Konza has not come up in this conversation, this entire
Right after M-Pesa, we have Konza.
Exactly, we have Konza. And if you go to Konza right now, it's just one large open space, maybe 2 or 3 buildings. But in the midst of those few buildings, there's a lot of quiet innovation that's happening. And I'd like to pick up from VC Ogutu, that point you just made around that good feeling of having shillings in Uganda or Tanzania. And I want to contrast it to having shillings in Addis or birr in Kenya. I've had 100 birr for I think about 4 years, and it sits somewhere in the house. I tried to go to a forex bureau to exchange it, and I was given a very wild figure. I mean, it was just not worth it. I'd rather wait until the next trip. And that powerlessness you feel when you're at the AU headquarters with your Kenyan shillings, and you can't do much. I want to contrast that to Mama Mboga in Busia, or Port Victoria. They move back and forth between a seamless border, and their shillings are powerful. The M-Pesa, I want to assume, is equally powerful. So I want to assume there are many Ugandans who have M-Pesa lines because they can transact in M-Pesa. I'm sure there's some degree of connectivity near the border, and they're able to come to an agent on the Kenyan side. And I want to pick those very practical examples and posit them or request our policy makers to think of that image. How can we make it simple to move seamlessly between Nairobi and Accra, or Nairobi and Johannesburg, or Nairobi and Cairo, and have that feeling you have when you have shillings in Tanzania, Uganda, and avoid that feeling you have when you have shillings in Addis? How do you make all that happen? And that's innovation, because it's already happening practically. And so digital currencies allow for that. There may be all kinds of hoops that are jumped through. Is it possible for policymakers to catch up with that reality that I know already happens? And if you look at content creators in Kenya, it's fantastic to be paid on YouTube. You never worry about everything happening behind the scenes. You just know at the end of the month, once you hit a certain level of views, there's cash you can use, though it's dollar denominated.
Yes.
How do we pass that vision to policymakers and tell them, go into that room, lock yourselves, figure it out, and then just come back to us and tell us we can get that feeling of being a Kenyan reserve currency in Tanzania? I think that's how I'd address that question around regional and political issues.
Definitely. Even not on, I see Twitter, you've seen X was paying creators the other day.
Yes.
Yeah, Elon was paying them. And
actually, Elon is moving in a direction of making Twitter a player in this space we are discussing. So that I think the whole acquisition of Twitter and its restructuring was to allow him a platform that can operate at the level that the Googles, Apples, Amazon, all those GAFAM actors who are already operating as nation states in terms of the economy and currency. I think Elon Musk wants a piece of that pie.
He's African, yeah?
He's African, South African, yeah.
Thank you, Fabian, for that question. I almost read keep on streaming those questions. That's not a question. Africa trade is difficult as it is. With the BRICS in view, we look at a continental benefit, or we're looking at certain blocks benefiting. Intra-Africa trade.
Yeah.
Within the different blocks that we've positioned ourselves, the EAC, the ECOWAS, seems even within those blocks, we still have minute challenges.
Yeah.
In that regard, we're not trading as much as we should, with our neighbors. So BRIC, if at all, I think offering something that we can adopt locally within East Africa to remove some of these barriers that we've been having within the EAC and now going larger continent-wise.
But I think the issue of intra-African trade has been very low, you're right. That's almost less than 3% of global trade. But I think we put too much weight on the issue of currencies, and we don't pay enough attention to what we call non-tariff barriers. The reason Kenyans don't buy products from Niger is many Kenyans don't even know where Niger is. They don't even know the structure of the economy. what are the products? That's the biggest challenge we have in Africa. We don't have enough knowledge and understanding of, places like Namibia. What can I buy from Namibia? So I think there's a whole information asymmetry amongst Africans about what value we can get from each other. And I think that's the vacuum that the United States has really tried to fill by trying to attract everybody into its economy. I met Martin here in the United States for the first time. We are both Kenyans, but we met in Chicago. So I think part of the Africa Continental Free Trade has to be about people understanding each other and speaking a common language. I've always wondered why they can't say all Kenyans now in Form 1 should study French, and in West Africa they should say all Form 1s should study English, so that in the next 10 years, everybody has some understanding of both English and French. So right now, it's very difficult to do. So people say it's all about currency. It's not about currency. There's no knowledge. People just don't understand what can I get from Mauritania, for example. Where do you even meet a Mauritanian? I've never met a Mauritanian.
But I think in
your life.
Mauritanians.
Yes. And for me, a lot of the African friends I made, and I'm sure Martin the same way, we met them in the United States. So we need African countries, African universities to partner. So there's a lot more what you'd call maybe semester abroad programs across Africa, because people have to understand each other before they say, oh wow, actually beef from Zimbabwe is the very best. I want to purchase Zimbabwean beef. So what's the currency of Zimbabwe? Now that creates demand. But as long as there's that lack of knowledge, you'll keep saying it's a currency issue. But there's really very little knowledge. If you take a young student and tell them, ask them what's the capital city of most of these African countries, they don't need to know. Ask them about the economy, the products. So I think there's a bigger investment in knowledge, and I think it has to start with the high schools, the universities. And that's what really America does. It attracts people from all over the world. Many of them stay there, many of them come back. And they have that understanding that, okay, this is what people do. So I think there's a whole understanding gap that has to take place. And I hope the Africa Continental Free Trade can address those information barriers.
Yes.
Yeah, I think for digital products, Africa is quite good at exchanging things. So look at music, for instance. So in the music industry, there's a lot of imitation going on. So you'll listen to a song and the beats are so Nigerian and yet they're East African. And then you'll find some Nigerian doing a collabo with an East African artist. So there's a lot happening on the music scene. I wish a lot more would happen on the commodity scene as well. My sister's married to a Nigerian. So there are some things that I eat that are Nigerian, and I'm sure there would be a hit in Kenya if people just knew that this thing exists and it's something that can actually be transported, and they would love it. So I think as Africans, we need to be a bit more experimental. We tend to be very set in our ways, and we say, no, in my community, this is what we eat, and this is the only thing I can call food. You give me anything else, it's not food. Some communities in Kenya, I shall not name them, are notorious in saying unless ugali is there, we haven't started eating it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to invite my fellow Africans to be more curious, because there's so much more to explore, so much more to enjoy. We just need to be a bit more curious, and then that speaks to our marketing as well. Maybe we should have more trade fairs, more exchange where people actually get to sample things and to realize this is the value I can get from Mauritania or from Lesotho. And that, I think, would be the beginning of a change here in terms of increased trade. It's not that we don't need each other. We don't know that we could need each other.
Yeah. And magical Kenya.
Yeah, magical Kenya.
That we have been doing.
Yeah, if I can build on those two trading services,
Yes.
And it's the reason I raised Konza. We are major importers of knowledge from South Africa. So many of our students, I think, go and pursue programs out of South Africa. We are net importers of hospitality from South Africa. We are net importers of, I want to believe, potatoes from Egypt, particularly the middle class out of Nairobi that weekly passes through KFC. We are net importers of power, I want to assume, energy from Ethiopia, which are all three countries are members of BRICS. We've talked a lot about the economic and governance systems. I think those are the two I argued: anchor, trade, and power. And then we've touched a lot on money, and I think this topic was around currency, so the financial system. We've not said much about the innovation system, knowledge, or the social system, relationships, which is what I think Dr. Ogutu and Ken are bringing up. And my gut tells me in Konza, Kenya can innovate for Africa and the world by attracting BRICS to have that as a medium of exchange for knowledge and relationships. Kenya getting into partnerships with BRICS countries, a short hop from JKIA, and reimagining in an area where nothing has been developed physically, but a lot of opportunity exists, and formalizing a lot of informal relationships that already exist around knowledge and relationships, but also money, power, and goods exchange, issues of trade. If Kenya can figure out a way of attracting the global powers, when they land at JKIA, typically they'll always go to the house of the hill, at the hill, State House. They'll have those power talks and then leave. What if we found a way of making sure they go to Konza, and at Konza, all these excluded actors are there. SMEs are there, academic institutions are there, different African countries are there. I don't think any actor involved in the science technology policy space is looking at opportunities specifically around the question that has been raised on inter-Africa trade being difficult. All right, let's innovate in an African context. All
right. Another question coming here. First of all, even before we go to that, the ideological differences that that we see with what has been there and what BRICS seems to offer, because the West for the longest time has been synonymous with freedom, and that's why we're talking about how much confidence do we entrust. For example, with the dollar, we know there is a particular set of value systems that is backed by this particular, or is backed in this particular currency. Now, I'm looking at BRICS, and there's a good pot, a mixture of sort of, you see some democracies here and not so democratic. I mean, and that comes to the point I mentioned earlier. Like, we don't see eye to eye in many things, but we are united. Should that, especially the political systems that run in the specific BRICS members, should that be a concern, especially for the future and stability of BRICS?
It's an interesting question worth answering. In a sense, you wonder how, say, Russia and China, which you wouldn't call democracies, are mingling with, say, India, South Africa, Brazil, that are democracies. And it speaks to something I once heard, that the truly international religion is money. That if you can benefit together economically, then all other differences are forgotten. But yes, I think we do have to look at what we deeply believe in and ask ourselves, are there values that some of these more powerful economies are espousing that we might want to distance ourselves from? Or can we actually dichotomize and say that they have certain values that we identify with and others that we don't? So it's interesting. China, for instance, so it's a communist country. So you have this one government that is in control. But then you'd expect a communist country not to be a capitalist country. But when I went to China a couple of times, I was shocked at just how capitalistic it was. So it's funny how On the political side, it's a communist country, but then on the economic side, it's more capitalistic than most countries I've ever been to, including the United States. So meaning there's a lot of competition. In fact, no holds barred competition. So in that sense, you almost wish you were in the US where there's some regulation and about, how people can engage and what you can copy or not copy. And so it's really cutthroat competition. It's the ultimate capitalism right in the middle of a communistic country. So which part of China do you want? How do you want to relate? What do you admire? What don't you admire? It's for me, it's just raising more questions than answers. But I think ultimately what's uniting them is that economic benefit, and then on the political side, getting away from what they consider the yoke of Western domination. So that's what's kind of uniting them. But then when you look at them, even among themselves, it's not straightforward. Just about a week ago, China released a digital map of what they consider to be the map of the world, in which they own a part of India, and yet they're both BRICS. So there's the question of what are they playing at? Will BRICS hold together? Is it as robust as we think? Could it be fragile if China itself is doing power plays with India, as they then have a common front of BRICS? Will this hold? So there are people who challenge the power of BRICS and say, is it something that's going to last?
Exactly.
Economically, when you add up the value of the economies, they'll be higher than the value of the other economies that dominate. So that seems to suggest that they are powerful. But then a house divided against itself cannot stand, as we know. So you're wondering where this is going when China is bullying India just a week after the BRICS summit.
Yeah.
They're engaged in this high-level bullying. What is all that about?
And even Africa itself, not necessarily bullying, but still as the part of this plus, those who are coming on board, if they won't change their mind between now and the 1st of January 2024. And look at Egypt, look at Ethiopia. We've had that back and forth regards to the Nile. Now you're here, you're seated at the table, now we are BRICS.
Right.
Yeah. So how do we, why did you build that brick wall you call a dam, Renaissance dam, that is Egypt telling Ethiopia. So it's kind of interesting. It does, because foundations are important, as you put it. Is this a potential risk for the future of BRICS?
I think it's just a reality of politics and economics. Sometimes they run parallel courses, sometimes they intersect, and it's just a fact of time. If you look at the US and China, we call them rivals, but actually it's the largest trading relationship in the world. We call it the bilateral relationship of our lifetime. I was looking at the data of flights between US and China. They are planning to double them by the end of this month to about 24. So it tells you that back to your Ethiopia and Egypt, they don't see eye to eye on the Renaissance dam, what it will do, but they are on the BRICS table. So it tells you sometimes we should not always look at things from a political lens. Let's also look at these things from an economic lens. And that's the reason, perhaps your question of BRICS, Kenya should join BRICS. It might tell you that the future of the world, you might have countries that are both members of BRICS and the IMF and the World Bank, Africa Continental Free Trade, because all these interests have a mishmash of sorts. So I think sometimes the economic proposition can be very powerful, but sometimes the political situation takes a backseat.
It's very interesting because one of the elements that we've seen from the West has been especially values. For them, looking at the United States majorly, if you tend to differ value-wise, especially, for example, just recently with Uganda, the back and forth that we've seen, based on values, we differ in in this regard. Definition of human rights, it varies from one jurisdiction to the other, and it just becomes a whole conundrum of issues. But if we continue going that direction, we wouldn't finish, and we wouldn't finish the questions. So let us continue going through some of these questions. Let me see. I totally relate. That is to you. Yeah, Stella can relate to your problems. I pay my Strathmore school fees in Uganda. And she has to change to Kenya shillings. Yeah, I'm officially a forex expert. Stella, welcome on board. I think Martin is the professor in that. But moving on, we have Ian K. What happened to oil being discovered in Kenya? Can we build our own oil supply chain, hence eliminating the import of crude and refined oil? Are we ready to go that direction? Martin, you're the one who's passionate about innovation.
Maybe one of the things I can do, building on the earlier question and values, and then linking it to oil discovery. For oil discovery, I think the key point is the value chain, so the quality of oil that was discovered in Gichinga, and the processes required to refine it and make it available for consumption is either too expensive or too complicated. It's lower quality oil, and I think the volumes are small. So it makes more sense to import already refined oil from Saudi Arabia and other countries that would offer it cheaper. So the whole issue of competitive advantage, comparative advantage, etc. And then, our neighbors around the region also have access to oil. So how does that relate to BRICS? I think some of the points I was alluding to earlier, the LAPSET corridor envisioned under His Excellency late Mwai Kibaki, aspects of it built under His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, the port in Lamu, and then currently under His Excellency William Samoei Ruto, a reimagining of the LAPSET corridor. That's how I would address that. But also allow me to touch on the earlier issue. And I talked about systems, markets, and institutions. And if I can read that definition, it's from some two experts, Boras and Edkis. The experts in innovation systems and national innovation systems. We had a radio show with Ken on innovation, Schumpeter, Lundvall, etc. Institutions are sets of common habits, norms, routines, established practices, rules, or laws that regulate the relations and the interactions between individuals, groups, and organizations. Going back to a theme that emerged earlier, I think there's an opportunity for countries like Kenya to reimagine institutions in a fledgling sense, almost experimental, at that intersection of BRICS, representing one axis, and the Bretton Woods institutions representing a second axis. And Kenya, in a sense, is being pulled in two directions. I was teaching about BRICS to our graduate students in our policy program just this past week. And I gave the example of Kenya being a catalyst that can help to drive change. So maybe on issues of around ethics and morals, there are institutions that Kenya can help build on behalf of Africa that espouse those in ways that may be aligned with the Western worldview. And at the same time, innovate in the context of money and trade in ways that work for the excluded, in ways that align with an eastward-looking or northward-looking view. But my student pushed back very strongly and argued, when you are a catalyst, you help others, but you are not lifting yourself. And in the world of politics and global politics, you have realism, so your interests matter. So what is Kenya doing? And one could argue Kenya could also then frame a space that allows it to move forward, even as it's catalyzing on behalf of these different extremes. Kenya is also taking up some of that opportunity for itself. So not only being a catalyst, but also figuring out how to move forward an African agenda, and then seed all that is gained to the rest of Africa. So earlier I talked about frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals. I talked about business and human rights, the UN Global Principles or UN Global Compact. Kenya has been experimenting with how to move ahead as an economy and carry everybody else along. So rather than be split into BRICS versus Bretton Woods, can Kenya pick the best of both worlds, catalyze, and then whatever gains Kenya makes, Kenya also shares with others in agreements it makes with others. Linking that directly to oil, it was a multinational tal of oil that was in Turkana. The pipeline that will send the oil to Lamu, a lot of that ingenuity was global, and they tended to be periodic uprisings from the residents of Turkana. What about us? And you've seen some of these issues playing out in Nigeria. Is there an opportunity for Kenya to embrace some of these global frameworks to speed up its economic development, but at the same time demonstrate how it can be done in an equitable way? And when we go to institutions, in the context of systemic change and market restructuring, I think that's the sweet spot for Kenya. And I see His Excellency Ruto doing that quite a bit, reimagining power dynamics, money dynamics, and reimagining new institutions. So it's almost like the halfway point between what we see with BRICS and Bretton Woods.
That's very interesting, man. I love the way you enter into lecture mode.
Okay.
Very nice. Definitions. A teacher.
Our students ask these questions 24/7, so you have to go into the room prepared.
Wow.
And a lot of what they ask we don't have in our textbooks. So panels like this, I know a session like today's will be very valuable for our master students.
Definitely. Oh, beautiful. Wow. So Ian, there you go. We thought when we discovered oil, we knew all our problems are done, and, you know, and here we are. So there are those challenges. James Sudi is asking or commenting, de-dollarization is just an interesting topic in itself. And also now the exploration on the concept of CBDC, digital currencies. Anyway, I digress. Hey, my friend, I came in late in the discussions. I wonder what the criteria is for countries joining BRICS. Yeah, recently Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. I mean,
I had addressed it.
yeah, definitely.
So yes, when you're looking at the volume of world trade, petrol is a huge part of that. So Saudi Arabia would be a desirable partner for BRICS to have. When we look at the control of the sea routes in the world, the Suez Canal, the Magallanes Straits, then now you seem to need Argentina to join the Pacific and the Atlantic, and then you need Egypt and Ethiopia. So we looked at their relevance in this whole discussion from that perspective.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But it pushes back and says it seems BRICS is accommodating only resource-rich countries. The poor are left.
Yeah, so I could speak to that as well. So if you look at some of those countries, yes, they're resource-rich. But then if you look at other blocks, so let's look at the G7, let's look at all these other countries that have ever come together as a powerful bloc. You find a country like Japan, which goes against all these concepts that you need to be a resource-rich country to be powerful. And that even speaks to what Bob Odero is asking in the next question, where you're saying, shouldn't we be focusing on human labor? Why are we talking about commodities and resource-rich countries? Shouldn't we come back to labor? So in answer to Bob, I would say that, yes, I think the ultimate resource is human beings and what they're capable of doing with their imaginations and their effort. But you can't totally ignore resources. So imagine I'm a laborer, I'm a miner. I could put the exact same effort to mine gold as to mine copper. And I'm putting the exact same effort, so as far as human labor is concerned. But then the value of what I'm getting out in terms of what the market is looking for, how highly priced it is, it's going to be distinguished by the commodity itself. So labor alone doesn't account for all the value that you get when you're offering a particular commodity. The commodity itself does have a certain intrinsic value or a value that is, denominated by what it can do. So you can't fully run away from resource-rich countries and ignore them, but it's true that some countries have defied all odds, like Japan, and have shown that by having very few resources, but having an exceptional labor force, you can work wonders. And I think as Kenya, that's the arena that maybe we need to play in. I know we're excited about getting oil, but it would cost us so much to extract it. I think we should take advantage of the fact that we have a good educational system and we keep improving it. And if we just invested in our labor, we could be quite a powerful addition to this conversation.
Definitely, very important. Let's go down. We have some 6 new messages. If you could just help us. Thank you very much, sir. Bob. So we're going to
Bob comes in again.
Yeah, Bob comes in again. Dr. Good says that the issue of technology, decentralized digital currency may provide a compromise solution to the conflict between money as a medium of exchange and money as a store for value. If tech be the solution, don't we still have to ask the question, who owns that technology? And won't the need for a government to regulate the problem still arise? Can money exist without a central regulator? Or are AI and algorithms our new regulators?
Yeah, I can actually speak to that, and I think it also speaks to the earlier question from Bob Odera and what Dr. Ogutu was raising. So the 2 key players in the AI space are China and the US. In China, it's state-led. In the US, it's industry-led. And we've seen a lot of issues associated with the ethics of AI coming to play. So arguably, many say Europe is coming a little bit late into the game to establish a framework that holds China and the US accountable. And the question is, where is Africa? Again, it goes back to the comment I made about Konza. Whereas the algorithms that drive AI are designed in Silicon Valley in the US and in Beijing and other capitals within China, the data that feeds those systems tends to be in Africa. And the WorldCoin debacle, I think a week, 2 weeks ago, we saw the Ministry of Internal Security and the Ministry of ICT at loggerheads on whether WorldCoin should be allowed to scan irises of Kenyans and what that means, even though WorldCoin was assuring everything was safe. It's interesting that that played out in Kenya, and Kenya was the first country globally to tell WorldCoin, slow down. So in answer to that, Bob, yes, there's the question of need for a regulator. I would argue citizens, those of us seated around this table, and I wish Dr. Monica Kerets had been able to join us. I'll appeal to the organizers of today's event to find a future event where we can hear from Dr. Kerets. Should have weighed in on quite a bit of this. I think there's an opportunity for Africa to take a leading role in what that regulation is, separate from North America, Asia, and Europe. And it's interesting that Xi Jinping talked about responsible AI working group in Sandton, South Africa, because this is the ground where there was a scramble for Africa in 1885 over land. I think there's an ongoing scramble for digital economy in Africa playing out, and it's squarely on the issue of data. Yes. So in answer to that question, yes, it raises issues of regulation. I'm bullish, and I'm called a social constructivist in class. I view the perspective of everybody. Actually think Africa can take a global leadership role in how AI evolves to be responsible AI.
And I can even see some of the responses and Bob's question. Let me start from the bottom, yeah?
Yes.
In the spirit of the current government, bottom up. Yeah, so blockchain, this is the issue about who owns the tech.
Yes.
Blockchain is built as open source for the very reason everyone owns it. For that very reason, everyone owns it. But one can always create a private blockchain that can be managed and controlled. Blockchain-powered digital currencies offer ways to decentralize, control, and use it. What blockchain-powered currencies do not have a standing army through things like the DAO, decentralized organizations. We manage ourselves and our resources as decentralized groups. So there is that element, innovation within innovation. I think this is something that is evolving.
Yes.
But the way Ken is smiling in that manner of, you guys are being too ambitious. You need to calm down. This issue of tech and who owns the tech, should it be of concern even as we talk about the tech evolution that we undergo?
And briefly, DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think innovation is the currency of the future. Now, when you talk about what has given the dollar strength over the last 100 years, we talked about the gold standard, we went to the petrodollar, but right now it's innovation. And that's why these Ivy League universities are trying to attract the best and the brightest. Once they graduate, they want them to be citizens because they know these are the guys who come up with blockchain, AI, and this will be the product. So the future is innovation. Any country that is interested in being relevant has to build innovative systems that attract the very best, because only then do you have insights on health, security, defense, and agriculture. So I think for me, what we are seeing right now in the United States controlling technology, it's an investment that made over the last 30 years. The Yahoos, the Googles, these are people who went to the Stanfords, have been supported, and now are creating huge companies. So I think it's a challenge for us here in Africa to ask, can we attract the best to our universities? And once they come here, can we keep them in Kenya? Can we keep them innovative? Only then will we come up with solutions that make Kenya a very relevant country. So I absolutely agree.
Dr. Ogutu, are you attracting the best?
I was actually thinking about this. I wouldn't say it's an obsession, but definitely a concern that has been raised that keeps coming up about, do you have a central regulator? So in all these systems, you guys are talking about who's the regulator, who's the arbiter, because that's the system we're used to, where you have one person that you can trust. And so if suddenly you're just leaving it out there, can we trust any of these new systems? So it just underscores the fact that all these systems are built on trust. So if, let's say, in the ancient meaning just 19th century, someone gives you a piece of paper saying, I have gold at such and such a jeweler's, you trust that that paper is not fake. It was hard to fake in those days. So it's the sort of paper that can fit into someone else's paper, and then you know you can authenticate. So they had primitive ways of authenticating, but which worked. But it ultimately depended on trust. I'm not taking this as a receipt, as representing genuine value, unless I can authenticate. And having somebody who is a trusted partner, maybe the only jeweler in town who accepts such deposits, and everyone knows what their certificates look like, then now you're okay, we trust this regulator. And so that's what many of you are looking for here. And BRICS, in a sense, is a system in which they are running away from having one particular regulator, one particular person that we all trust. Because as we've seen, you can have all your deposits suddenly frozen. And then what do you do? So they don't want to enter those kinds of situations. So we're really looking at something that is agnostic, technology that can allow you to authenticate. As we know, the way blockchain works, you have a public reference where everyone can check, did this thing happen, is this transaction there? Then you have the personal identification that gives you access to whatever you particularly own. And so the better we construct this platform, the more trust we can have. But of course, there's that big question of, Is it really a platform that is managed or owned, or the technology is owned by one person? And open source seems to be a solution against that, where no, it's actually not owned by any one person, and you can actually check for yourself how that transaction is constituted. So I'm really a believer in moving in that direction. If you want to go to the philosophy or anthropology behind it, then ultimately all these systems are built on trust. So how trustworthy are you as a country? So if you claim that you will pay a certain amount of money, can we trust you to do that? Can we trust you to run the economy in such a stable way that 5 years from now, a contract we entered into 5 years earlier is still going to be valid? Can we trust you? Because if we don't, we'll want all kinds of assurances, which won't be you. We'll want you to pay us in somebody else's currency and enter, I don't know, give us your port so that we'll have it, because we really don't trust that you will pay. So for me, it's interesting that when you peel below all this conversation, you find that your ultimate wealth is how trustworthy you are, how honest you are, how competent you are. And so can we trust you based on what we know about you? And we really need to work on that as a country and as a continent. We need to exude that aura of being competent and honest, because that underlies any transaction that we enter into with anybody.
Trust, yeah. But I don't know which era you guys come from, but I come from the era that used to sing at PPI, trust and obey. There's no other way. Dr. Ogutu says, yeah, it's all about trust, Let me see. Battle trade, actually combating battle trade seemed to really work on the great levels of trust. It was decentralized. Battle trade, and I mean, an element of barter was introduced. When was it I think that was different, but there was a situation where we exchanged.
So in the past, you needed to have exactly what the other person was looking for. And that's how barter takes place. And then in the absence of that, you need to trade with somebody else who has something. So it's A and B trading. You need to go to C because C has what B wants and C wants what A has.
Yes.
And so A can trade with C, get what C has, and then trade with B, and then you complete the loop. And the more you're trying to trade with someone who doesn't want what you have, but what you have does have value, you now need to somehow connect all these different needs. And in the past, it was very complicated to do that, but arguably it is less so now. And if we work out technology well, what you're proposing about barter here may not be such a bad idea, because we know what these things are worth in terms of other goods, and we can translate that in ways that we can initiate a transaction.
Interesting. Gentlemen, it's 3 minutes to 10. We had agreed that we should stop at 10. We agreed we should start at 7:30. We didn't. That agreement. So at least we can try and keep this one, yeah?
So that we can be trusted in future.
Trust, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. So in brief, in closing, I'd like us to have a moment. This is the first edition of the Knowledge Series. Hopefully we have more of these and different topics. We just lay the foundation, build even stronger. Dr. maybe start with you as I'll close with you because you're the senior here. We start with Martin. Martin, in short, your parting shot, and also maybe tease for us what we should be looking forward to when it comes to our Knowledge Series. This is the first episode we have.
Sure. Thank you very much, Noah, and my co-panelists, Dr. Ogutu and Ken, for a very vibrant conversation, and Janet, who helped to organize us on behalf of the Alumni Association, and Dr. Monica Carrot, we hope will be with us in the future. And I think we already have a future topic around that. My parting shot, I'll finish off where I started. SMEs wanted to be part of Brexit. the lowest entry level for them was to get tenders. And then more strategic was to figure out policy frameworks that allow them to engage in each other's markets. I'll talk about the 5 major clusters. I'll just mention them. You've got the Tokyo Yokohama region. These are tech clusters where science innovation happens in plenty. You've got the Shenzhen, Guangzhou, that's Southern China cluster, then Beijing that I mentioned. Then you have Seoul in Korea, and then Silicon Valley in the US. What do we have in Africa? More specifically, what do we have in Kenya? My parting shot is that if you think of the 104-kilometer bypass corridor, that's what I called it, a phrase I used recently in some remarks I made, and as a circumference, and if you think from the center of Nairobi city to Konza, about 70 kilometers, all the SMEs you will find within that circumference, within the area represented by that circle, within the radius along the diameter and projecting from the center, the radius all the way to Konza. What can Kenya do to prepare for SMEs in 2024 to be on the agenda in Russia? When the next BRICS summit happens, Kenya doesn't need to be a member. We just need the voice of micro, small, medium enterprises represented there, and immediately that summit ends, deals to be happening. To have that Tanzania feeling that Dr. Ogutu mentioned, I'm in Russia, and my Kenyan shilling is allowing me to do magic on behalf of Africa.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ken?
Indeed, these are interesting times, and I believe to succeed, we need to apply the 3 C's. Number 1, curiosity. We need to be curious. We need to learn. We need to go beyond our everyday lives. You know, when people hear about BRICS in South Africa, they think of it as a very distant event. But let's be curious about how these events affect our lives. Number 2, collaborate. Collaborate. You cannot achieve anything alone. So whether you're part of BRICS, whether Kenyans will be part of BRICS or IMF, the World Bank, you have to collaborate with peers. No worthy goal can be achieved alone. And lastly, create. We need to create. This country really needs to create more. We are importing too much as a country, and we need to start producing more locally. So we need to be curious, collaborate, and create real value.
All right. Curiosity would kill the cat this time. And create also. Thank you very much, Ken. Dr. Ogutu, you wonderful host, the first of many. Maybe apart from what we're discussing, the topical issues, I'd like you to touch a little bit on why these conversations are very important and why somebody should look out for the next edition of Knowledge.
Thank you very much. I think we should always be learning, and we shouldn't just sit back and say, oh, it's too complicated. The reason we have these seminars is because we bring experts on board, and people who have a curious mind, like you and myself, who can ask the experts about these questions, and we really try to make it relate to your lives. So we're not trying to impress you by our technical knowledge. We're actually just trying to use whatever we know and our communication skills to break it down in such a way that it relates to your life and you have a deeper understanding of what is happening around you. Because if you're enlightened, it's much better than just being at the mercy of the forces that you feel are bearing on you. So this really empowers you by coming to these sessions. Things are broken down for you and the connection is shown for you, and then you're now empowered to make decisions. So I personally look forward to more of these sessions. I'd like to really thank you for the wonderful moderation and for the great participation from our experts who are Strathmore alumni as well, and their familiar faces here. Thank you so much for having come here. And of course, the alumni, Strathmore alumni organization that put this series together. So we look forward to many more.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Normally, this is the future, I'm projecting the future. After that, there should be a round of applause like, thank you very much. much, Dr. Vincent Ogutu, Vice Chancellor, Strathmore University, Martin Mbaya, who's the Director of Executive Education at Strathmore Institute of Public Policy and Governance. We have Gichinga, Chief Economist, Mentoria Economics, and we're not able to have Professor Monica Macau. Unfortunately, due to a technical challenge, she's out there in Shanghai, but looking forward to the next edition. Well, also we'd like to thank you, all of you who've been able to join into this conversation, engaging, asking questions. Thank you very much. It's such an honor for you to take your time to be here. The Brad Mullis, Jen Kilonzo, John Mbaya, Shalino Lalo, Fabian War, amongst many others that I can't see were hidden and just represented by the blue directive. But thank you very much for being here and participating in this conversation. And hopefully the next edition we'll be able to invite you guys over so that we can have that human connection one-on-one. But that has been episode 1, knowledge series, and with a full stop there. See you the next episode. I think it's 2, right? You never know. The world is so unpredictable. People can just come up and say, after 1 is 3, but it's